What's up, good people? Um, I'm doing a pre-recorded because I just got home from the theater and I just saw F1. And as you know, let's see what's going on with my system here. All right. So as you should know, I just did a review for Superman not long ago, and I felt the need to kind of give more context after watching F1. F1 reminded me of some things that I hadn't talked about in a while. Now, a couple years back, I talked about what I was noticing as a developing medium, TV and film, that has been led by middle-aged white men that have a good degree of Hollywood access, right? I talked about a number of them, films by people like Mark Wahlberg, a lot of Taylor Sheridan's. I mean, Taylor Sheridan is damn near on TV, well, I guess, and film, kind of leading a one-man renaissance as it pertains to men in media. The biggest one to date has probably been Tom Cruise, Top Gun Maverick. There's this kind of recurrent theme about a return to manhood that I think has been underway for the last couple of years, but it's being led by, white men with star power, to be honest with you. And they've been kind of leading the charge. And there's this kind of gentle pushback against this feminist dominated narrative in media for the last 15 odd years, most especially, where men have to apologize for their existence. They need to, consider themselves inherently evil, inherently the lesser gender, inherently the bearers of oppression and abuse for anyone that is not a heterosexual male. These men have been pushing back against it in very subtle but direct ways. I call it the medium where men get to finish their sentences, right? So if you go watch, again, going to Taylor Sheridan, if you go watch Yellowstone, led by Kevin Costner, right? You got Tulsa King with Sylvester Stallone. You got Landman with Billy Bob Thornton. You got 1883, which is, another, Sheridan show, Tim McGraw and Sam Elliott. You got 1923 with Harrison Ford. They're not domineering, but they're kind of a nouveau reassessment of an unapologetic, unchecked masculinity. But it's not just an unchecked masculinity out of nowhere. It really, like I said, it's a reevaluation, and in it, there's kind of an acknowledgement of an ignored emotional labor kind of role that men play in families and relationships and work environments that have really gone ignored. And this is why I call it a new reevaluation, because it's not just a return to, the 50s, where you just grab some old school actors and reinvigorate that kind of notion of masculinity. That's not what's happening here. They're actually acknowledging the accusations that feminists have made toward men and really the genre of the apologetic male. They're acknowledging it and they're responding to it. See, this is the difference. They're not reacting. They're responding. It's a conversation. It's a discourse. And they're saying, no, there's a lot of stuff in your assessment, in what Hollywood has been doing that has dismissed. It's thrown the baby out with the bathwater as it pertains to manhood. And so a lot of these projects attempt to reevaluate manhood. And so you got the ignored emotional labor of men. You got the wisdom of men that a lot of feminist influence media refuses to acknowledge that men are capable of bearing wisdom at all. The kind of overlooking of men's capacity for persistence and the silent sacrifice that men have bear as fathers, as grandfathers, so on and so forth. So this kind of reevaluation has been in play for a little while now. I don't think it's gotten the acknowledgement that it's deserved, but it's happening. So a couple of years ago, I started talking about this. So Top Gun Maverick, you kind of see this. And really, it was a couple things that inspired today's show. I just came back from a wedding of a good boy of mine. His daughter got married. And I got to see some boys that we haven't all been in the same place for 25 odd years. So shout out to my Dominguez Hill crew. It's good to see all the brothers in the cipher. We got together. But I had a conversation with one of them, and he's a basketball coach. And he said something that really blew my mind. He talked about coaching a team at a school where they were losing by 45 points a game. He stepped in for little to no pay and completely restructured the whole program to the point where they were winning championships by the next year. Right? I'm not going to give any details, because if I say, anything in detail, people will be able to identify him. I don't want to put my brother out there if he doesn't want to be. But one of the things he said was, once he started winning, he started getting complaints from the parents, from the staff at the school. And the complaints were that he was being too hard. He was pushing too hard. Some of the kids were complaining that he was being too tough on them. So eventually, after a lot of deep soul searching, he stepped down. And essentially, the program became what it was before he got there. It was basically a glorified rec ball league. And they immediately started losing by 40-odd points again. And the last time he saw them, if I understood him correctly, he said students kind of looked at him and put their head down because they were part of the request. And so as he and I were talking about that, he said he noticed he had some conversations with some other coaches that had experienced some similar things and had to step down, had to be pushed down. And so in the course of this conversation, I said, you do know what's happening here. What's happening is there's a kind of purposeful attack on manhood, even on an institutional level. Now, like it or not, these are some of the things that Trump is responding to, because he was able to pick up an audience of men who were going unheard by the left. And he's addressing this push we've had against what has been deemed toxic masculinity, right? There's no qualification for manhood in any other capacity, which is one of the reasons I started the Sacred Black Masculine component of my show, where I point out the things that men have been doing for centuries, for eons, and has been going unacknowledged recently. But my point here is there's been an ongoing attack on men, and it's not just happening in media. It's actually happening institutionally. It's happening in our educational spaces. It's happening in spaces where boys were always able to go to learn about manhood, and not just boys, girls, because some of these coaches coach girls basketball, for example, right? And there are qualities associated with manhood that are being dismissed and pushed under. And a lot of the men that espouse and live those qualities are being dismissed and pushed to the side. And so this is what this film tradition is starting to deal with. So I talked about this a couple years ago with Tom Cruise and Top Gun Maverick. And if you really watch the movie, right, one of the things you notice is he keeps grappling with whether or not to retire, because he says the Navy doesn't need me. And if you remember, Val Kilmer plays his friend Iceman, who is also now at this point, I might get the term, I don't remember if he was a general, admiral, forgive me, don't shoot me, I forget the rankings, but he was in a higher position. And if anything, he was the only reason that Maverick had a job, because Maverick would keep going into spaces and pissing everybody off. But one of the things he says to Maverick in the course of the movie is the Navy needs more of you. And this is not about the Navy. What I'm saying is what he was actually telling Maverick in that scene was they need manhood, because even the military is lacking it in a very particular way. Tom Cruise used that film, in my humble opinion, as a vehicle to suggest that manhood had qualities. Now, I'm going to give some spoilers. So if you ain't seen Top Gun Maverick at this point, it is what it is. There's a point where one of the soldiers, one of the pilots underneath him is his best friend's son, his best friend that dies in the first Top Gun movie. And long story short, he denied him access to promotion years ago. And he didn't ever tell anybody why. So in the course of the movie, he's sitting with his lady, and she asks him, why did you deny his application? Basically, what he said was, the boy's mother reached out to me and said she didn't want her son to die like his father did. So he said, I denied the application. And so this lady asked him, well, did you ever tell him you did it because his mother didn't want him to? He said, no. His mother died. Why should he hate her too? So in other words, he bared the weight of this young man's hate, essentially his godson, the last remnant he had of his best friend, living personified godson. And he had to deny his godson the one thing his godson wanted more than anything else, to emulate his father. And he had to bear that young man's hatred, but he did it. And don't get me wrong, it cost him. You can see the look on his face, how much it hurt him, but it cost him, and he did it anyway, simply because this was something his mother requested. right? But my point is, he bared the hatred of that and spared the young man the truth about who actually, requested that so that he could continue to love his mother unfettered. This was a silent sacrifice, a weight he carried. And he never told the young man, even throughout the course of the film. They found their grounding in other ways, right? But this was an example that I think Tom pushed through with the film. And so there's a number of these kinds of examples. If you go watch Mark Wahlberg in the movie Father Stew, where he plays a real life person who became a Catholic priest and, experienced a life-ending disease. Very powerful film. But why that character? Why at this time? This character who's unapologetically masculine, and because of his class status and lack of education is easily dismissible, but in the midst of bearing this, this incredibly difficult disease, this debilitating disease, offers up a simple wisdom rooted in what I would call a very masculine, kind of personification, and given straight wisdom with it, defying everybody's expectations, even though he's been counted out and dismissed over and over again. Being unapologetic about his masculinity and the expression of it, and the qualities that go with it. I'm gonna go through a few of those qualities when I talk about F1 in a minute. So these are the kind of things. Now, obviously, there's a racial dimension to this, because these are, these films and projects that I've enjoyed in this last couple of years because of its appreciation for the qualities of manhood that are often dismissed. They're overwhelmingly white. They're middle age, but I think a lot of that is also tied to the fact that they have the power to push these projects through in an environment that's hostile to media projects that appreciate masculinity. So it kind of takes that power, but I acknowledge that these at the same time are white men. But I would also argue that you got cats like Taylor Sheridan that sometimes write black men better than some other productions by black folk. Not because we lack the capacity, but we often don't have the power to push through the kinds of projects we want to push through with the kind of resistance we're getting in Hollywood. Now, I'm not saying we should stop. I think there's a healthy appreciation we can have for, even independent black film, and we should continue with that. But this new movement I'm talking about is still growing. And so, in other words, this film F1 is, in my opinion, part of that tradition. This time you got Brad Pitt. Now, Brad Pitt is one of the last of the cool white boys. He's a cool white boy. He reminds me of, in that respect, he's in the same ilk as Kevin Bacon, Ethan Hawke. These were the young, cool white boys in the 90s, and they've gotten into middle age and they still cool. They still cool. Brad Pitt has kind of his expression of it is an unwavering confidence, especially in the last few films he's done. He's kind of really mastered this. I think especially since he was doing those robbery films with George Clooney. Y'all know what it is. Anyway, it escapes me at the moment. I wasn't planning to talk about it. But anyway, he's really kind of bared it. So when you see him on screen, these last few movies, much more quiet, does a lot more with his face than with his words. Unwavering confidence. And you see scenes like that in F1 where he's being questioned, he's being insulted, and he just looks at people. His very energy is really, other people's opinions are irrelevant. What I'm doing is what I'm doing. I don't care what other people think. And his character actually says that in the movie at one point. So in that, I'm sitting there in the theater watching this film, and I really just watched it just for something to do. I'm a little mad at y'all because ain't nobody told me to go watch the movie and tell me, and they didn't tell me if it was good or not. But I checked it out. It was good. But what I liked about it wasn't about good or bad. It was about the element the film brought that Superman lacked. I'm going to get to that in a minute. So as I'm watching this movie, it ends up doing a couple of things. You see, on one end, Brad Pitt's character, again, represents unchecked masculinity. But masculinity that also has wisdom, has strategy, has a pure motivation based on whatever the focus is, which is in this film F1 racing. But nobody understands him. And as a matter of fact, some people just outright don't like him from the minute they meet him, and he doesn't care. It reminds me of a Clint Eastwood, a John Wayne kind of masculinity. But again, not a return to it. It's more of a spiral in the sense that it's elevating and coming to the same point on a higher level because it's addressing the accusations that have been made about manhood in a very subtle way. In that he doesn't just walk around with his head down, carrying himself as if he can't be anything but toxically male. No, he exhibits wisdom. He exhibits care. He exhibits protection. He exhibits qualities that often go unannounced. Now, let me say, this is the director of the film, and let me see. His name is Joseph Kosinski, and apparently, he not only directed F1, he directed Top Gun Maverick, and he actually directed Tron Legacy, which I thought was interesting because Tron Legacy also had some of these qualities, but in a very nascent form. If you go back and watch Tron Legacy, you have Jeff Bridges, does an excellent job in the film, right? And if you haven't seen that, about to spoil some elements of that too, right? So, picking up after the original Tron film, young man who's in his, I'd say early 20s, finds his father, who is still alive in the world of Tron, in the computer world of Tron. And he's been held there for decades, both in the real world and in the world of Tron. So his son goes in there, and you see this balance of masculinity between father and son. And the main villain of the film is a copy of his father at a younger age. So in a way, you end up having this split division between a false son and a real son. And Jeff Bridges in that world plays the creator of that world. He's essentially God, and the people worship him. But he's not all powerful. He has specific powers no one else does, but he's not all powerful. And the way he's been fighting against his enemy, this earlier copy of himself, preoccupied with ideas about perfection that he's long since outgrown. The way he has to fight him is through not fighting, which is a very Zen concept, which he embodies. He embodies these Zen principles. He meditates, and you actually see light floating around him when he does. It's very interesting. There's a point where there's kind of a stalemate. This is where the contest has existed for decades until his son pops into the world, and his son brings a less wise, more impulsive, more risk-taking masculinity to the equation and changes the whole game. And so at that point, the whole film changes, and they're on the run trying to get his son out to escape. But you see these interchanges of masculinity at different stages, from young and impetuous, but risk-taking and brave, to, stuck in a philosophy that is artificial and doesn't work, which some of us find ourselves in at certain stages of our lives, to our ultimate state of wisdom when we've reached a certain age, we've had a certain number of experiences, and we meditated on those experiences and gained wisdom from it. You get to see all of these shades of masculinity within this family of father and son playing out on the screen. So I find it interesting that Kosinski directs that film and, of course, F1. So you see elements of that here. I think it's important, because these are the kind of things that I think we should be advocating for in films. And I want to see films, especially with Black men, where we can kind of show, our experiences in that. Because Black men and wisdom have not been allowed to be in the same sentence as far as the public consciousness is concerned. And we possess it. Many of us do. As much as anyone else, as little as everyone else. But for some reason, men are not allowed to express those dimensions. So, Kosinski does a good job in this film, kind of bringing those elements, that I've seen him direct in other films. And he's not always writing those other films, but, based on the projects that he's done, whether it's that he chooses these projects or that he has a hand in how they're played out. But I think he's on one level or another conscious of this and kind of plays into it. So I just kind of wanted to shout that out real quick because of his past kind of productions. Right now, the problem with James Gunn's Superman, it's entertaining, and I like James Gunn, but the problem with it is James Gunn is kind of stuck in amber in a certain way. As much as I enjoy some of his other projects like Creature Commandos, Peacemaker, of course, Guardians of the Galaxy, and I hate silly characters. The last thing I wanted to see was a raccoon with a machine gun. I could give a damn. I mean, I can't stand sea-level characters in comic books, and I'm a 45-year collector. James Gunn actually made me like Guardians of the Galaxy just because of how he, in a way, humanized all those characters, gave them some three-dimensionality, made them funny, but also gave them some depth. I saw people crying at the last movie. Hell, even at some of the first two. So he brings a degree of humanity to the stage or to the screen that I enjoy in his projects. But with Superman, it just highlighted one of his Achilles heels, and that is that he kind of turns all his men into adolescent 13-year-old boys. I think he does it because it's funny, and I think my son was right, and I said this in my first review of Superman. He does it because they're trying to make Superman appeal to a younger generation. And Superman comes across, at least according to my son, he said something interesting. He said their way of experiencing Superman is video games. So I grew up on the Christopher Reeve, Superman. That was the first one that really set the bar for me. Brandon Routh, everybody that, Henry Cavill. I've seen all of those, but his generation experienced it through video games. And he said, for the most part, we find Superman boring. And I get it. Middle-aged guy, married, has a responsible job as a reporter. He's in most iterations of Superman, both he and Clark are fairly mature, right? Fairly mature. Christopher Reeve played Clark as a little bumbly, but he was still mature. And he still had a manhood to him. If you backed him in the corner, he'd stand his ground and stand up for what he thought. But he kind of, but aside from that, he wasn't immature. He wasn't bumbling. He wasn't emotionally underdeveloped. James Gunn's Superman is that. And I'll say, I like David Cornsweet. I thought he did a good job. I thought he bulked up well for the role, towering at 6'4". I think he played a good Superman. I think the issue I had with it is more how it was written. And it goes to James Gunn. Now, James, as I said, I like him, but I think one of the problems he has is he creates male characters that kind of stop developing at about 13 years old, emotionally speaking. They're emotionally immature characters. And usually his women, they're kind of mommy characters that have to clean up behind all of these errant, overgrown boys. And I think this dynamic works with C-level characters that most of us have never heard of, and are all of a sudden being brought to the screen. Creature Commandos is freaking hilarious for similar reason. Peacemaker had me on the ground laughing my ass off. It works perfectly for John Cena's Peacemaker to be a 13-year-old boy. It doesn't work for Superman. Superman is a grown-ass man. Matter of fact, he's the pinnacle of manhood in the DC universe in a certain way. And it's, I won't go into a long, detailed analysis on why I've always hated Lois Lane, but, it even plays into why she was always attracted to him. Even if she didn't want to be in a relationship, she couldn't resist. Although the way they've been writing her in the last few movies and other projects, she tolerates Superman, which is something I think is horrible. And I think it played into this film. She tolerates him. She really tries to decide if he's even worth her time on a certain level, which has never been the case, but it speaks to how James Gunn writes Superman. So the emotional immaturity is a factor, but the larger critique that F1 helped me realize about Superman, James Gunn's Superman, is that it lacked manhood. He's still in many ways a grown boy. And I think it's best shown when he's playing Clark Kent sitting in the office, hair unkempt, clothes kind of all over the place. He looks like, he goes to work and doesn't even take a shower. This is something a grown boy would do. He carries himself like a grown boy. He does not carry himself as a man. And I think what would have been good, if you're going to go that route, which I wouldn't agree with in the first place, but if you're going to go that route, James Gunn should have gave Superman what Brad Pitt and Damson Idris kind of give in this performance in F1. Let's see. Let me pull it up just so we can have some faces. You guys know Damson Idris from Snowfall. I didn't watch Snowfall. Wasn't really a crazy fan as far as that's concerned, but here, let me pull this up so you guys can see some faces here. So here we go. Yep, there it is. All right. Now, I didn't know what this film was really about. I knew there were race cars. That's about it. I saw a trailer a few months ago. Didn't watch anything since. So I went into this theater cold, really just looking for something to do. Didn't really expect to like it. Didn't expect to dislike it. I like Brad Pitt. It is what it is. I just thought it'd be a good popcorn movie. What ended up happening is I saw a rite of passage take place. Now, again, the racial elements are there. Younger black male who's young, inexperienced, arrogant, older white male, wise, grizzled, experienced, has something to teach, not a lot to say, very quiet, kind of stoic character. So we go back to some of these principles. But what it ends up being is, this kind of rites of passage film where the old master has to teach this young upstart who really has no desire to learn from him. If anything, sees him as a threat. And who has no father either. Apparently, both men actually lost their father at a young age. So there are going to be some spoilers if I haven't said so, but I'm not going to do an overview of the entire film. But I am going to say there are going to be some spoilers. So if you haven't seen it, it is, you might want to check out if you're interested in not knowing anything about it. But they both lost their fathers at a young age, which is not a big part of the film. It's a minor side statement, but I'm including it here because I think it plays a role. In this, so Damson Idris, and I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right. But anyway, yeah, Damson Idris. So anyway, he's the young upstart. He's talented, but he's inexperienced. He's hard-headed. He's arrogant. He's also very afraid of his career stalling before he really gets to act out. And Brad Pitt's character plays a grizzled journeyman driver. In other words, he literally just goes from racetrack to racetrack in different forms of racing, which I thought was very interesting. He hasn't done F1 driving in about 30 years, but he has, mastered different styles of driving, different types of driving. And he's a consummate professional. He's extremely good at what he does, but he's a little reckless. But it's a recklessness that is also rooted in wisdom. It's not recklessness for the sake of recklessness. It's not a young man's recklessness. It's a strategic recklessness that is purposeful in what he does. He just doesn't always share what he's doing and why with those around him, especially if he doesn't trust them. And so throughout the course of the film, you see how he influences every environment he steps into. So he's asked by an old friend to come in and save this F1 crew from going under. They're about to lose. They haven't won anything. And if they don't rank by the end of their particular season, I think there was something like 9 races left when he's brought in, they're going to fold. So his friend is asking, Brad Pitt's character to come in and race for him, just to save his racing team from going under. Now, I'm not going to get all the terminology right. I know little about F1 racing, so forgive me. But anyway, Brad does come on, goes in, and he starts to influence people. Now, again, some people are threatened that he's there. Some people just don't like him. Some don't like his reputation of being a former gambler, having had 3 marriages. They see him as, valueless. Others know of his skill and talent. And, others don't know anything about him at all, right? He navigates all of these relationships simply by holding on to some principle. He keeps his word. In times you wouldn't think he needs to, but he's very consistent. He's quiet. He doesn't speak very much unless he absolutely has something to say. Most of the time, he'll just look at you. And if you say something stupid to him, he'd look at you and smile. And then he'd keep it pushing, right? A very kind of stoic masculinity. But I'll name off. Matter of fact, hold on. I actually put them up. Because I literally wrote these while I was sitting in the theater. Okay, let me take this down so you can see. These are some of the things I noticed in the course of the film. And these are kind of at random, but these are all of the masculine qualities that I saw in the film. Mastery, leadership by example, strategy, competition, measured aggression, detachment from others' expectations. And this is most of these qualities he demonstrates to others in his actions. Some of them he articulates out loud, but very few. This is one of the things he imparts to the young Damson. His character, he teaches him to, give less attention to other people's opinions about him. Focus, clarity, stoicism, courage, risk taking, right? But again, as an older man, he's not risk taking for the sake of doing it most of the time. He does have a moment where he has an emotional crisis because he's human. But throughout the film, he's actually mostly consistent. His risk taking is highly strategic. He's a master driver, right? So the things that he does appears to be an accident, and it takes a while for everyone to catch on to why he's doing it. And most of the time, what he's doing is ingenious, right? But nobody knows, and he doesn't share his plans until people start to trust him and he begins to trust them. So clarity, stoicism, courage, risk-taking, unspoken pain, right? Much like I talked about with Tom Cruise's character in Top Gun Maverick. Experience, right, which is tied to wisdom. Really, the only difference is that wisdom is experience that's been reflected upon, right? Inspiration to the team. Now, this is one of the impacts he has on the environment he's in, right? Even the people that don't like him begin to follow him after a while when he demonstrates that what he knows is valuable. It has value in the outside world. What I meant to say in the next line that I should have erased here, but I was saying, like in Biker Boys, he actually drives because it's really a form of meditation at a certain point. Meditation is not really the right word. He reaches a state of pure kind of wisdom in action. Everything goes silent, and it's just him and the car. And this is something we see in the film Biker Boys with Lawrence Fishburne, and it's played out there too, where there are spiritual masters that take what they're doing and elevate it to the highest degree. But no one said that was limited to spirituality. You can apply it to anything: swimming, skydiving, motorcycling, whatever you're into. For me, it was drawing. As a kid, I spent years, just on the floor, 13 hours a day, especially in the summers, just doing nothing but drawing. And I was in a world unto my own. It was just me and a pencil and a piece of paper. And I felt like something was guiding my hand. I was in a meditative space, but I really had never heard the term meditation before. But it was such a peaceful space, and I had no stress, no worries. It was a world unto my own. So when I saw those kinds of narratives in Biker Boys and in F1, I understood immediately what that was. There's a purity to it that separates you from ego. It separates you from materialism. It's just purely the soul of what you're doing. That's considered the highest quality of expression for whatever it is you're doing. And again, not something that we often see men do at this point, because men in popular media today are monsters, are rapists, are abusers, or toxic, or oppressors. All of these kinds of and there's severe differences between different groups of men, but none of that is qualified for all men because they have penises are inherently bad. But in this film, you actually see what I would argue is the highest quality of meditation as it pertains to a certain gift. And in this context, it's driving. The way he carries himself with women is very stoic. It's that you can appreciate a woman, you can engage a woman, but he never makes a woman the point of what he's doing. And this is something we've been hearing online for over a decade, to focus on your work, focus on your craft, focus on what it is you're here to do. And she can be, if you frame it that way, a welcome addition to what you're doing. She could be a welcome presence, especially if you don't allow yourself to bring in anyone that brings nothing but chaos. Nothing but peace. If you only allow people that bring peace into your space, she can be a welcome addition, but she's never the point unto itself. And so this is one of the qualities you see him exhibit in the film. He doesn't make a woman more of a priority than his work. And he's able to actually enjoy the engagement for what it is without disrupting the rest of his life. But anyway, so that's one of the other points. And it's toward the end of the film, you start to notice it actually becomes a rite of passage for Joshua, who's Damson Idris's character. And the film doesn't present itself this way. It just hits you as you watch it. And at the same time, it hits Damson, or his character, again, Joshua. You don't realize what it is. Everybody, including Damson, begins to take his leadership because it's demonstrated. And so it's a very interesting rite of passage film. And ultimately, what I'm saying is, let me see, move this back. So there you go, Damson and Brad. And they butt heads a lot of the film, Brad sees his character, Damson's character is arrogant. Damson sees him as a talentless, old man who doesn't belong there. But over time, he starts to understand that the old man is actually extremely gifted and has to learn from him. But it really isn't about racing. And this is what men have known for the longest, especially in the Black community, because a lot of us have become community fathers in a variety of ways. Lately, it's been online, but we've done this for generations. We've been coaches, especially in basketball, football, whatever. But the point was never just about the sport. We turned things into rites of passage. We took what boys were interested in and we turned it into an opportunity to make them men. And that's what happens in this film. Damson becomes a man by learning from an older, wiser man who is using racing to teach him principles of manhood. And I think in that respect, this was a lost opportunity by James Gunn, because if anything, for an immature Superman, a rite of passage arc would have been good. I think it would have been necessary, and I think it would have rounded out the film. And again, these are the kinds of things you see in a lot of Taylor Sheridan's work. There's a lot of kind of things you've seen in a current slew of films. I think if James Gunn had incorporated a rite of passage for this immature Superman to grow into his manhood, the way Damson Idris's character kind of begins to do that in this film, I think it would have added it would have added a level of nuance that would have spoke to multiple generations. And I think James Gunn was purposely targeting younger generations, trying to bring them in. But you don't need to alienate other generations to do that. You can do both, because people who aren't ready to appreciate the nuance of it will ignore it anyway. It'll be when they watch it, when they get a little more mature, that they'll see it and appreciate it. But they'll still enjoy the action, the colors, the going back and forth, the humor. But those who are a little more mature will appreciate that you added these elements in, and they'll enjoy it for a whole different set of reasons. And this is why I think the early MCU kind of approached this better than the early DCU, because the early MCU had layers, right? They had layers, various levels of kind of narratives going on in the film. Some that spoke to old school comic book readers like me, some that spoke to the people who never even heard of these characters. They mixed it up. So if you've been reading comics for 40 years, you got a little treat because you saw somebody in the background who had a name that you knew from the comics, or wore something that you knew from the comics. And it was like a little treat that nobody had to know about to enjoy the movie. But, they spoke to people at different levels of appreciation. DCU, they're a little raw. They're still trying to do that. Obviously, they're just a couple of projects in, so it's understandable. But I think in this film, you have to do it because Superman is the flagship character of DC, the most popular hero in the world. Now, Batman sells the most, but Superman is the most well-known. And with a flagship film, I think you needed to add a little nuance. And I think the perfect nuance for this film would have been a rite of passage where Superman actually learns to be a man. And interestingly enough, you can kind of sense that there's this difference that already exists between him and, say, Mr. Terrific, right? That would have been an interesting kind of framework to watch Superman actually learn some principles that take him to another level of maturity from someone like Mr. Terrific. But it didn't have to be Mr. Terrific. Hell, if they'd have done Ma and Pa Kent, well, it could have been from his own father. And, as an aside, I don't think James Gunn, he did Ma and Pa Kent or Jor-El and Kara. I don't think he did, or Lara. I don't think he did any of them right. Both sets of Clark Kent's parents weren't done right to me. Usually that's the source of his wisdom. The influence of Jor-El and Lara once he comes of age, but most particularly the influence of Ma and Pa Kent. In this film, you get one conversation with Pa Kent that gives you a sense that there is some wisdom somewhere in that household. But short of that, they really don't carry it the way we've seen in other projects. You got to understand how important that is to the narratives of Superman. If you don't do it right, you get Red Sun Superman or a number of variations that aren't too cool. And if you don't know what that is, look it up. Red Sun, where he crash lands in, I think it was Russia, right? So, anyway, so my point though is I think it would have been useful if he'd picked up on what F1 picked up on, or more so if he would just come into contact with this renaissance in manhood in media. And I'm really hoping it spreads and that we see a little more of it. I think you got a little bit of it in Sinners with Ryan Coogler. Coogler does men pretty well usually. I mean, go back and watch the first Creed movie. I think actually all three of them, there were elements of it that I appreciate. But the first one was the one that really kicked me in the chest, the father-son dynamic, which he also brings to the first Black Panther film. Right? The father-son dynamic. Coogler does men well. Lately, he's been really trying to cater to women. And I think in this moment where, you know, there's a kind of reevaluation of manhood and wisdom, I would have liked to see him delve more into that as opposed to trying to appease women, but it is what it is. And you can tell he's kind of overdoing it because the Dora Milaje in the Black Panther series, they were really like the president's security. They weren't a damn army unto themselves, but he delved into it because they wanted to kind of market these projects to women and men in the MCU. And you can see him carry that into Sinners as well. And it is what it is. I didn't dislike it by any means, but at the same time, I think there were some opportunities to delve into some elements of manhood that I don't think have been thoroughly touched upon well in Black film to the degree it could be. And it should be. But I will say that there is a genre where it's so far being led by older white men, but you can see it. If you've watched Yellowstone and you've watched Kevin Costner, there's some real interesting elements, some real interesting conversations about manhood. Same with Tulsa King. Even the very first season, some real interesting elements about manhood and old school manhood being led by old school men, but old school men who are bringing in who are acknowledging what's been done and said about men and responding to it. You know, so Sylvester Stallone does a lot of that in Tulsa King. And then you see it most particularly with Billy Bob Thornton. If you watch Landman, which has only had one season, he brings in a lot of elements of manhood. But then there's, you know, I'm not certain projects are perfect. I mean, there's a lot of simping going on that needs to be addressed, but there are some elements. And in an environment where men haven't really been able to finish their sentences in the last 15 years in projects like this, it's refreshing. It's refreshing. But anyway, that's what I have to say about it. I want to know what you think. Give me your thoughts about, you know, some of these projects. Did you see F1? Did you see Superman? You know, give your thoughts about that. I'm curious to know what you think. I mean, even if you look at Man of Steel, and I thought Man of Steel was okay. I didn't think it was as perfect as some people are saying it is, but it was cool. But if you look at the difference between Pa Kent, Kevin Costner, versus, and I've seen this guy who played Pa Kent in this latest Superman. I remember him from the film Constantine. He was always a weird dude in most of the projects I've seen him in. Didn't expect him to be picked as Pa Kent. He did a good job for what Gunn wrote. But if you compare his presence in Clark's life to Kevin Costner's, you can see the difference, the maturity, the focus, and maybe maturity isn't the right word. I don't mean to suggest he was immature. It's probably more a class thing. But anyway, Kevin Costner's approach to it is very articulate, very straightforward, and they butt heads. They butt heads. If you watch Man of Steel, you know, young Clark is like, I don't even know why I gotta listen to you. You're not my real father. Kevin Costner, his approach to Paul loses his life to make a point to this young man that he knows is going to change the world. He's willing to lose his life to impress upon this young man a value system that he knows if Clark doesn't get, he will not reach his potential. Even in Man of Steel, it's a shortened arc. It's not as widespread as say in F1, but in Man of Steel, there is a rite of passage. And it really ends for Clark with the death of his father, Pa Kent. And then you have the subsequent death of his Kryptonian father, even though he's only software, right? Where he plays, the kind of AI system in the ship. So he gets another opportunity to meet the consciousness of his father, not his his biological father's emotionality, but he gets introduced to the consciousness of his father. And his father helps to further push away any limitations that Clark has and helps him find his fullest self. And this is exemplified in his learning to fly while listening to the words of Jor-El. See, all of these things symbolize a rite of passage. Clark in that film goes from teenager to man. Under Henry Cavill's performance, you see a rite of passage. Now, you don't have to do a rite of passage in every Superman film, but again, if you're gonna have David Corn Sweat play a 13-year-old boy, emotionally speaking, he needs to have a rite of passage, and it could have done this film a lot of justice. Anyway, give me your thoughts. Curious to know what you think, and let me know if you think that would have been a good thing to add, and what else might have been useful. All right, check out F1, check out Superman, and if you haven't already, definitely support Sinners, which is available for streaming now. Even if you found the film in alternative ways, give Ryan a couple of dollars because he deserves it. All right, take it easy. Peace.